This is going to be another one of those videos where I talk about this stupid kind of take I keep seeing online repeatedly. And one of the ones that drives me very nuts is about a TV show I like very much. I consider Better Call Saul the better product, but Breaking Bad was a television phenomenon that will not be topped for a very long time until the next Sopranos thing comes around. One of the frustrating things that a lot of people are tired of is talking about, oh, is Walter White and Heisenberg alter ego, or is he really Heisenberg the whole time? That whole is Batman the real person and Bruce Wayne the alter ego, all that kind of shit. The same thing, but that one has a clear answer. Walt was an asshole, a complete fucking egotistical psychopathic asshole the entire time. Um, it's something that you get a lot more on a first watch because, Cranston's so charming, and the first couple of seasons, Walter's such an underdog that you find it really hard not to root for him, especially when a lot of his adversaries are the complete scum of the earth. It's very easy to fall into the idea of sympathizing with what Walt looks like and not what he acts like. And it can actually take a few seasons, even for an intelligent person watching the show, to sink in like, oh, I'm watching a show about a complete fucking douche, right? But one of the interesting things that happens in contrast is as many people who were watching the show when it was current, okay, not people who binge watched it and formulated opinions in rapid succession of watching dozens of episodes back to back. It's understandable that a lot of the people who were just watching the show were sympathizing with this underdog Walt, especially when some of the douchier things he does early on are things you wish you could do. Like one of the most important scenes in the first, I think it was either the first or second episode, is when Walt assaults those guys that insulted his kid, which was fascinating because Walt doesn't actually ever like beat up anybody, hardly at all in the show, except for those two guys. But if you've ever watched any interviews from Vince Gilligan, a lot of the show is written on the fly, and it's very serendipitous, actually, that the show is as consistent as it is. Like, they were going to kill off Jesse halfway through season one. I mean, like, a lot of this shit was really on the fly. Smart people writing episode to episode rather than having this grandiose plan, right? And oftentimes, when you got people writing on the fly like that, you get more of a Lost and not a Breaking Bad. But this isn't exactly the topic I aimed to talk about. I wanted to talk about a character who was, when people were watching live, vehemently fucking despised, to the point that apparently some people, and it was probably like a handful of people, wrote like hate letters and death threats to, I believe her name is Anna Gunn, the chick who played Skylar, who is a really good actress, by the way. Really, really good. Um, and it's a hallmark of a really good actress when you get so viscerally into a show that you actually transfer, or stupid people anyway, transfer their hatred of a character to an actor. That's dumb. But once people hear that, they think of the kid who plays Joffrey in Game of Thrones, or they think of the kid who played Anakin Skywalker in The Phantom Menace, and they get this kind of visceral, well, that's not fair reaction. And what's hilarious is it works both ways, because you get these kind of Redditor, lefty, I don't even think most of them are feminists. A bunch of them are just pretentious douches who think that because Anna Gunn was mistreated by some people, that they then transfer that sympathy to Skylar, the character. And I've seen no shortage of like literally hundreds of people saying shit like, Skylar is not only not a bad person, she's normal and she's deserving of your sympathy, and she's the most sympathetic character on the show, and everything that happened to her was unfair, and she's like completely a victim. And like, did we watch the same show? I was so emotionally affected by the I Fucked Ted episode that I stopped watching the series, because I didn't watch it live, but I stopped watching the series for a while. And as somebody who's been cheated on and been hurt by women in the past, that can hit you right in the gut, especially when you're you know into the series, you're watching it for the first time, and you are empathizing with Walt as an underdog who's been fucked over, who's feels like life has passed him by, and he's just really putting himself out there Because what's fascinating to me is the wrong take I had about Walt was I kind of thought of him as a coward. And he's anything but that. He's almost everything but a coward. Um, but he comes off as this very tense, like wuss of a man, when really that's just because he's like a nerd who's unused to physical conflict. But that's again kind of self-contradictory within the first season, which is kind of a messy season. But back to Skylar, right? So Skylar, if you look at the way she acts, she's massively judgmental. She's very emotionally disconnected from her husband and bosses him around. Like, she clearly wears the pants in that relationship, which is fascinating because in the very limited flashbacks we get into Walt's life before he became a fucking absurdly overqualified high school teacher, it you don't really actually get any backstory to how he and Skylar met, but it really looks like he was dating the other chick running Gray Matter, and they broke up over something that's not really explained. And I don't think they ever outright say how old Walt and Skylar is, but I get the impression that Walter White is older than Skylar by a fair amount, and he probably kind of knocked her up relatively early into their relationship. And I think that's part of what led to his departure from Gray Matter. And Walt never explains exactly how he was bought out for like $5,000. Even when they were a startup, being bought out for $5,000 in a tech startup is a really low price. Meaning that Walt probably burned bridges so bad and was so angry at everybody who ran that company that I don't think he was pushed out at all. I think he left and was so glad to fucking stick it to him, up yours, flip him off, that he probably took $5,000 on purpose when he was probably worth, even then, much more. But, you know, Skylar at least never holds that over his head. And that's about the only negative feminine trait as a character that she lacks. She's disloyal, she's arrogant, she's bossy, she doesn't listen to a fucking word Walt says. If you pay attention, even just the rhythm of the dialogue in any of the conversations they have early on, she talks over him constantly, walks all over him. And even though her sister is a mega cunt, you know, we don't really have any further look into who Skylar is prior to the show past that, but you get the impression that there's probably not a lot of women in Skylar's life who like her, and she doesn't actually appear to have any friends, and she doesn't really appear to have like much of a social life outside of her sister, and that could be a failing of the writing. I think she is an underwritten character, but if you look at all of her behavior, she's a bitch. And then only when she's in a position to take advantage of Walter does she come back into his life and actually buy into his criminal enterprise. Never forget that famous crawl space thing where everyone says, well, that's when he becomes Heisenberg because he has like a mental breakdown. Never forget that all the money that he had saved up to that point, which as far as I know was millions of dollars, she stole and gave to Ted while living in Walt's house, after living in Ted's house and fucking him and rubbing that in Walter's face. She steals his money, and her justification is, well, you got it being a criminal, so it's nobody's money, it's my money. I can just take it, because what are you going to do about it? Call the cops? Exactly how is this a sympathetic character? Exactly how is this a normal character? How exactly is this a victim, even really, if you think about it? The only victimization she had was being forced into a choice of leave my husband, but which again, like the common thing is, well, she could have just left, but she wants to leave, and you'll never see your kids again, and I'll tell them who you are, and I'll ruin your relationship with them because fuck you. And therefore he's like, no, you're not leaving me. But he doesn't even say that. He says, you're not taking my kids away from me. And this is what bad parents do to each other, is weaponize their children against each other. This is what toxic people, plural, do to other toxic people, plural, when they're in a relationship. So the moral of the story is Skylar's a cunt. Okay, she's not sympathetic. She's not a good person. She's not innocent. Okay, and she wasn't forced into anything. She could have sold Walt out at any time. She could have actually left him and fought him over the kids at any time. And she says, "Oh, I'm scared." Keep in mind, Walter has never struck her. There's one of those times where, like, oh, he said no, but he fucked her anyways or something that one time. And then, well, hey, the one time when she really put her foot down, he walked off defeated. Okay. So yeah, they had a toxic relationship. Of course, Walter's not a good person, but does saying, okay, here's Walter, who's an extremely darkly evil fucking character. There are good writers who've come out and said, like, dude, like, he's one of the most evil people who's ever been a character on TV. He's a fucking monster. And it's fascinating how long it can take to come to that realization, sure. But just because he far outstrips Skyler in terms of who's the worst person, I don't understand how it's become this baseline Redditor mainstream take that Skyler did nothing wrong. Nonsense. Fucking nonsense. And she was more than happy to go along with Walt to fuck over her sister and fuck over Hank. Why? Because she thinks Hank and her sister are douchebags. And guess what? Hank's a douchebag. Her sister's a cunt. There's hardly any good-natured characters in the entire show. I mean, Jesse, is naive and he doesn't want to do harm, but he goes all in when he has to. Okay, he at least has some scruples in the way that they can continuously portray Jesse in a positive light is to portray him around like his puppy dog fucking friends. I always will forget their names. The two best hitmen this side of the Mississippi, and the big guy who got shot. All that shit. They're shown as goofballs. They're meth addicts and drug dealers. Okay, so at best they cause indirect harm. They're not good people, but the show is constantly about foils and reflections. So I suppose that people really can get wrapped up in the fact that because fucking Walter White's such a goddamn dark star, that he just outshines with darkness. It's such a fucking stupid take. Forget I said it. But you know what I mean? Like, he's just a glaring fucking black hole. So you think, well, Jesse's such a good guy. Not really, but comparatively, yes. Um, People think that about Gale. People think that about um, a lot of characters on the show. But if you look at them in their own little microcosm, most of the characters on the show are at best just douches. They're just douchebags. Hank Schrader's a douchebag. A lot of Jesse's friends who are cute and charming, and they're deliberately played in a puppy dog manner and tried to be shown as harmless. But they're douchebags. Okay, there's very few characters in that entire show who aren't complete fucking douchebags, and their name are like Walter Jr. and Hank Schrader's partner, whose name I'm sorry I forget, but portrayed by a very good actor. I love that actor, whose name I also forget. But you know what I mean? Like, who else on that show is actually a nice person, or a moral paragon, or a kind person? They're all just like driven, obsessive characters, and that's the motif. That's the angle of the show, is that you're looking at many obsessive characters. But what's especially frustrating about Skylar is she doesn't even have like the benefit of like egotism or arrogance. She's just kind of a cunt who doesn't really think about how anybody but herself feels. But because she's being in a lot of ways victimized or bullied around by Walter, you go like, well, okay, there's Walter. Walter's taking advantage of her at points in the show, therefore Skylar good. No, Skylar repeatedly takes advantage of Walter and other characters in the show, and then bitches about them constantly. It shows a complete lack of any kind of gratitude or an understanding of any variable in what's going on. The whole "I am the danger" conversation is a lot of people think it's funny because it's Walter just, stroking his own ego and just going off completely like a lunatic. But Skylar's like saying like, I don't want you to be hurt, but she repeatedly hurt him before, during, and after that point in the show on purpose, out of sheer fucking spite. Out of just like, you're not acting the way I want you to, therefore fuck you, and it was kind of poignant at the end, when she says, if you say you're doing this for the family one more time, I'll fucking lose it. And at that point, it makes perfect sense for her to say that. But there was a point where that was genuinely something that Walter was very concerned about. Okay? Even if it was from that angle of Gus Fring, playing to that side of Walter saying a man provides for his family, it was kind of coming from a place of arrogance. However, his intentions were good, well past the point of Skylar fucking being a complete cunt to him repeatedly. Skylar doesn't become even a little sympathetic until like by the time Bill Burr's on the fucking show and they've bought the fucking gas station. And even Skylar knew how to manipulate Walter, because Walter's like, why the fuck would I launder my money at a fucking car wash? It was a car wash, not a gas station. And she knows exactly how to manipulate him and says like, oh, the guy at the fucking car wash thinks you're a fucking dick. And he's like, oh, he thinks I'm a fucking dick. I'm going to buy his fucking car wash and throw him out on his ass. She's not an idiot. She's not naive. She's not innocent. She is also a cunt. She is just nowhere on the level of Walter White as a horrible character. So I won't have any more of this gaslighting. Skylar did nothing wrong. Oh, children empathize with Walter White. Real adults empathize with Skylar White. Kill your fucking self. That is such a bullshit take. That just tells me that you just didn't watch the show. You're just looking to try to posture and say, oh, I'm a fucking grown-up because this woman, actually didn't murder anyone and actually didn't really sell drugs. She just laundered, like $30 billion, or not 30, but like $30 million and hid it from the authorities and manipulated people and used it for her own selfish gain. And the really annoying thing is she didn't even like Ted. She was fucking Ted to stroke her own ego. I'm still desirable. I can still fucking dump my husband and get whoever I want and twist him around my finger. She's a bitch. I don't for a second understand how people can't tell that Skylar is a bitch. And she is really effective at pissing people off because Anna Gunn is a really good actor who understood the fucking mission, which was to make a character who's a bitch. I mean, like, how much is it? It isn't, oh, Anna Gunn accidentally made sure that everybody fucking despised this character. That's not what happened, okay? And part of it is protagonist syndrome and people over-empathizing with Walter White. That is part of it. That is far from the entirety of the equation. And I shouldn't repeat myself any more than that. Thanks for watching.